Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, the channel where we are making a computer role-playing game using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. I realised just a few minutes ago that I'd made a mistake with some of the code that I'd put in, and I thought I'd show it to you and you can see if you can work out what the problem is. And then I'll show you the solution as well. We're in the page Explore 2 of the main game Into the Underworld, the one where you're exploring a dungeon basically. And of course, when you get into a new area, the system has to generate what tunnels lead from that area and also what's in that area, if anything. And we're at the part where we're generating what type of encounter, if anything, is at a given location. And I wanted to make particular locations, particular types of encounter, rarer close to the start of the dungeon and more common as you explored further, so as to give a feeling of that things were sort of changing and that you had to explore and sort of you were finding new things. So you start with Cx and Cy equal to 0. So they're like your X and Y coordinates. And you can move in any direction. North increases your Y attribute by 1, and west will decrease your X attribute by 1, etc. There's no limit to sort of where you can go. So here's how I tried to do it. We create a random number between 2 and 7 using random bracket 2, 7 unbracket. And then we say if that number is greater than Cx plus Cy, so because you're only exploring sort of north, south, west and east, basically that's meant to be how many moves away from the start you are, right? The further you've gone into the dungeon. So we'll compare this random number to Cx plus Cy, and then if Z being the random number, is greater than Cx plus Cy, then instead of having these sort of special sorts of encounters, instead it sets it to 0, which is an empty intersection. So the intent of that is meant to be that at the start you'll get more empty areas, and then as you go further and further out, you'll be more likely to get these more sort of special rare areas. So that was the intention. That's what I did. And can you spot what I did wrong? Maybe pause the video if you need to have more than a few seconds to think about it. But I'll wait a few seconds and then I'll give the answer. Okay, so the answer is that this works fine provided I'm only starting at 0, 0 and increasing Cx and Cy. In other words, if I'm only going north and east, then this is fine. But what if I'm going, say, south? If I'm going south, I'm going to have a reduced Y value, and that will make it less likely. As I go further and further south, the negative number will get more and more negative, lower and lower, and so therefore it'll be less and less likely that that this thing won't be turned to 0. I'd need to get a higher and higher value for X in order to sort of counteract that. If I go south and west, in other words, if I'm decreasing my Y and my X values, well, this will always happen. A random number between 2 and 7 is always going to be greater than 2 negative numbers added together. So I've done a thing that only works in one. It only does what I want it to do in one quadrant. What I want to do, what I should do instead, and what I now have done, is instead of having Cx and Cy, we need to have the absolute value of Cx and Cy. In other words, if Cx is 5, we need to count that as 5. But if Cx is minus 5, we need to count that as 5 as well, because that's just as far from the origin, the 0, 0 point. And similarly, Cy, if it's minus 10, well, that should count the same as positive 10. So how we do that is as follows. Instead of Cx, we have math.abs, so capital M, ATH, dot, or full stop, or point, decimal point, ABS, which stands for absolute value, and then we have bracket, dollars, CX, and end bracket. And then, of course, we do the same thing to CY. We have plus math.abs bracket, dollars, CY, end bracket. Now, as a side note, we can't have math.abs bracket, dollars, CX plus dollars, CY, end bracket, because what if one was positive and one was negative? What if I was at, say, CX is 5 and CY was minus 5? Well, CX plus CY is 0, isn't it? And so math.abs bracket CX plus CY, end bracket, is going to be 0. And we don't want it to be 0. If I was at 5 minus 5 or minus 5, 5, we'd want that to be treated as 10. And so that is the mistake I made. And I don't know. There's not a lot of a moral to this story, other than that sometimes when you're in the shower, you suddenly realise that you've done something dumb. And also, that's how you do absolute values. If you want to do, say, the distance from something, and it doesn't matter whether that's a positive or a negative value, use math.abs. But anyway, I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.